Hey Fret fans, Scott from Fret Props here, and today we're going to be installing our elbow or knee flex servo kit into the arm from a plastic pose and stay skeleton. So the arm I have here today is from one of the skeletons from Home Depot, but this should work with pretty much any of the pose and stay skeletons that you can find at the big box retailers. I've disconnected the arm from the skeleton so that we can work on it a little more easily here. In this case, it just pops out of the shoulder socket. And the first thing we're going to look at is how we're going to actually be moving the arm. So the kit will allow us to move the arm like this, but because this has a ball and socket here, we can actually choose the position of it. So typically what you might see is something more like this, where the arm would be like reaching up and down. But what I'm going to try to do is actually create a violin playing skeleton here. So what I want to do is actually turn this to this angle so that when this arm is mounted onto the skeleton, it'll move his arm like this, and he can hold the bow for the violin in his hand, and hopefully in the end he'll play the violin. So let's go ahead and set this arm aside while we work on the servo and getting that set up to attach to the arm piece. All right, so the first step as always will be to unbox our servo and install it into the servo block, which I have here. We're using the Fret Props Premium Heavy Duty Servo. We can go ahead and open up the box and remove the bag of attachments that come with the servo. If you've watched our videos before, you know that we're not going to be using most of these, but we do want to keep track of this small black screw here because we're going to be using that later to attach this hub shaft to the servo itself. I'll set this aside for now. We can take the servo out of the box. This is the servo itself, and we're going to go ahead and install it into the servo block. And the first step of that is going to be taking the bracket for the servo block and passing the wire for the servo through the block, and then installing the mount onto the servo like this. So if you've watched our videos of servos before, you know by now that the hardest part is usually getting this servo block bracket attached to the servo. And that's because for some reason, a lot of times these plastic hooks here don't line up with the threaded holes well. Well, today I'm going to try something different. I'm going to go ahead and actually try to drill out those little plastic mounting hooks here to make them slightly larger. So I have a drill here with a drill bit on it. I'm just going to go ahead and drill these out just a little bit bigger, being careful not to actually break them. So that should hopefully give me a little bit more wiggle room when I install the servo onto the servo block. All right, so now we can go ahead and pass the power cord of the servo back through the servo block mount. We can snug it up to the servo itself here, and we can go ahead and use some of these bolts here to attach the servo to the servo block mount. And for these ones, you're going to want to use these little washers. So we're going to just take the washer, we're going to place it onto the bolt, and then we're going to use the bolts to secure the servo to the servo block mount. I have a 3mm hex wrench here, which is going to help us out. And I'm still going to do the usual. I'm going to leave these a little bit loose as I go around, just to make sure that I have as much play as possible before I tighten everything into place. Once I have all 4 bolts kind of loosely fit in, we can go ahead and head around and tighten them up. All right, and I will say that drilling out those holes helped quite a bit. So if you are struggling to get those to line up just right, hitting them with a drill bit that's just a little bit bigger than the actual pre-drilled holes in the servo will actually help quite a bit. All right, so the next step is going to be installing the side mounts onto the servo block. We have 2 of them. You'll see they have a flush side and a sort of indented side here. The indented side is going to go towards the servo, and we're going to put them here on the end so that the tops of them line up with that servo screw there for the shaft of the servo. And in order to secure these in place, we're just going to put them where they want to go, and then we're just going to use some of these bolts here and pass them through the mounting bracket for the servo block, and then screw them into the side mounts for the servo. I've said it before and I'll say it again, but I'm going to be leaving these slightly loose in general until the final step of the servo block assembly, because there are other times when I might want just a little bit of wiggle room to try to fit different things in place. So I'm just going to be tightening these about like 70 to 80% of the way. And we'll flip it over and put the second side mount right across from the first. All right, so then lastly, we're just going to put the top onto the servo block. The top piece also has a flush side and a sort of protruding side here. We're going to put the flush side down towards the servo and the protruding ring facing up. So this is just going to sit right on top like that. And we're just going to secure it in place with some of our bolts here. Once the servo block is fully assembled, we can go ahead and attach the hub shaft to the servo. In order to do that, we're just going to place the hub shaft through the top mount of the servo there so that it seats down onto the gear shaft of the servo. We're then going to take our small black screw from earlier. I'm going to place it on the end of a screwdriver and just insert that into the center of the servo hub shaft and screw it down. Now the last thing I'm going to do before I attach an arm to this is actually make sure that my positioning is relatively centered. And it seems good. I'm just moving this by hand here. I want to attach an arm to this, and I want to attach it in the right way, because when we attach this servo to the underside of our skeleton arm, this hub shaft is going to be here. We want to have an arm on this side of the hub shaft that can, when this turns, move a linkage that's connected to the forearm piece of our skeleton arm. So that piece is this here. This is a 5-hole beam, and what we're going to do is actually just place it here onto the top of the servo hub shaft. We're going to line it up with 2 of the threaded holes that are here on the hub shaft. You'll see that there are 4 threaded holes here on the hub shaft. So I'm just going to line it up on this side, facing down away from where I'm going to mount the servo, which is this piece here. And then I'm going to use some 12mm M4 bolts and go ahead and connect that. Once I get one of the bolts started, I'll go ahead and align the position for the second one and then install that. And once those are both in place, I can tighten them down. The last thing we want to do is just double check our rotation. So the servo is going to mount under the arm like this, and this is going to be the beam here for the linkage. And we want to make sure that we have an even amount of swivel from left to right. And we're pretty good there. In practice, we're going to only be using about this much of the range of the movement of the servo, but we just want to make sure that we're not limited in one of the 2 directions too much. All right, so next up, we're going to create the linkage that's going to go from this arm, this beam here, to the actual arm of the skeleton. So let's do that. For that, we have this piece of 632 all thread, and I have 2 spherical rod ends here. I also have 2 nuts and 2 lock washers. So how we set this up is we're going to take one of these 632 nuts, we're going to thread it onto the all thread here, get it about that far down. We're going to take one of the lock washers and put that on, which will sit between the nut and the spherical rod end. And now we're going to thread this into place. I'm going to thread it all the way in so that it can't thread any deeper into the spherical rod end. And then I'm going to back the nut up to the spherical rod end itself, and then I'm going to use a pair of adjustable wrenches to tighten that down. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the same to the other end. All right, when you're done, it should look something like this. You want to make sure that your spherical rod ends are relatively aligned. You don't want one sort of totally off from the other one, so that they can sort of interact with each other in line when they're connected to the arm itself. All right, so next up we're going to attach this linkage to the arm that we have mounted to the servo here. To do that, we have a 540 bolt with a 540 nylon lock nut here. So in order to attach this, we're going to put a washer on it first. We're then going to pass it through the back of the arm here, like that. We're going to put another washer on here. We'll attach one end of the spherical rod like this, place a third washer here on the outside, and then we'll use this lock nut to secure that down. All right, in order to tighten down this bolt, I have a 3/32 Allen wrench here. I'm going to insert that into the end of the bolt. And then I'm going to use my adjustable wrench to tighten down the nut on the top here. And we'll go ahead and snug that up. All right, so there we have our linkage attached to our servo. We can now go ahead and attach the servo to the skeleton arm. All right, so to attach the servo block assembly to the arm, I'm just going to take the skeleton arm itself, lay it over the servo block. I have my arm here on the hub shaft adjusted to what I think will be kind of the most extended position. So I'm just checking to see that when this is, aligned up like this, it's going to be a good position for me to start in. Once I've determined the position, I can go ahead and drill holes here in the arm. Basically, we're going to be drilling through, and then we're going to be using some bolts to pass through the arm into the threaded holes here on the side of the servo block. So once I have that lined up, I can go ahead and come in with my drill bit. I can go ahead and drill some holes here for the bolts. This doesn't need to be super precise. Just get it close. Okay, I'll double check my distance here, and I'll go ahead and drill the second hole. All right, once we have our holes drilled and our servo in the right place, we can go ahead and use some 45 millimeter M4 bolts, and I have put a washer here on the end of it, and we're going to thread these through the holes that we created in the arm, and they're just going to go into the threaded holes here on the side of the servo block. So we can just line those up and thread them in. We're going to be using 2 of those, and once those are in place, you can go ahead and tighten with the 3 millimeter hex wrench. Okay, we're going to snug these down. We're not going to go super crazy and crank them super tight, just enough to hold the arm onto the servo, or the servo onto the arm, as it might be. All right, so the last step here is going to be to attach our linkage to the forearm here. And what I'm going to want to do is kind of look for a spot where this will actually sit nice against the bone. And I think we're going to go for right here, and I'm going to drill a hole through the bone that we can then pass a bolt through to. So I'm just going to line this up and take a reference for where I'm going to drill. So we want to go right about here, and I'm going to drill a hole there. Then I'm going to take a 540 bolt with a washer and install that on here, and I'm going to come in from the back side and pass that through the hole that we just drilled so that it comes out there. I'm going to install another washer here. I'm going to install our spherical rod end on top of that. And then I'm going to finally place one more washer here, and then a 540 nylon lock nut here on the end. As we did before, I'm going to take my 3/32 Allen wrench. I'm going to use that to hold the bolt in place. And then I'll come in around the other side and use my adjustable wrench to tighten this down. All right, so you can see there that now that we have everything attached, as the servo moves, it's going to flex our elbow in and out. And I think that's going to create a pretty good motion there for our violin playing skeleton. All right, so here I've reattached very roughly the arm to the skeleton, and this is all super rough, just kind of proof of concept stuff, just using zip ties and things to hold stuff into place, but just wanted to make sure this is actually going to work. I've plugged the servo here into our Pico servo controller, and I've programmed it. If you need more info on that, you can see some of our other videos. I've been covering that pretty extensively. So this is just a little preview of what this is going to look like, and as we continue to install more kits, we're going to complete more animations, do some more dressing and reinforcing of this skeleton to create a finished prop. So let's check out the violin playing. All right, so that's a quick video of installing our elbow or knee flex servo kit onto a plastic skeleton. This is an ongoing series, so if there's something I didn't cover in detail in this video and you have questions, always feel free to leave a comment on the video or send us an email at sales@frightprops.com. See you next time.